If I had to choose just one tip, one Mexico money tip to shout from the rooftops, it would be when you go to the ATM in Mexico to withdraw pesos using your foreign debit card, please, please, please remember, always choose to decline the conversion. This isn't at every single ATM, but I would say the majority of the time I have this option in Mexico, and that is whether I'm going to accept or decline the bank's conversion. Opening the bank app on my phone to give you a little example of this tip in action. So back on June 4th, I withdrew 9,000 pesos from the Santander ATM here in Guadalajara. They told me that the exchange rate was going to include a 6.5% markup. It was going to be, with the exchange, $547.68 US. But when I chose to, boom, decline the conversion, it actually came out of my bank account as $529.83, which is a savings of, I need to do the math, and I'll put it up on the screen right here. Here's the savings. That's just something I had to share. I've shared it in other videos before, but I think sometimes it just like gets buried in other advice. Yesterday, I spent something like 2 hours scrolling through, reading through YouTube comments to collect the questions for today's video. Another YouTube channel reports that inflation in Mexico has been high. Coupled with the change in exchange rate and looking at Numbeo, it appears that the cost of living in Mexico isn't that much different than in many places in the United States now. Rents are probably the exception. Curious to know what your experience has been. Back when we lived in Querétaro, we would get our garrafones, which are I think it's something like 5-gallon, these huge jugs of drinking water. When we left Querétaro in October of 2022, one of those garrafones cost 42 pesos. Now, about a year and a half later, here in Guadalajara, one of those garrafones costs 51 pesos. Even more than inflation, what has affected our expenses, our cost of living here in Mexico the most the past year has been the strength of the peso. I think that it got to something like 16 pesos to a dollar. I don't know, maybe it even dropped below 16. Even just a year ago, 20 pesos to a dollar was kind of the standard calculation that I was doing, that most people were doing in their heads. I'm filming this today on June 7th, and this morning when we checked the exchange rate, it is back to about 18 pesos to a dollar. So this stuff, it does go up and down. However, I don't think it will ever be as affordable as it once was for people coming from the US and Canada and settling in Mexico. I think in Mexico there is much more of a spectrum for, I guess, there are more options for how you're going to spend your money. If you're on a tight budget and you want to go out to eat, you can get amazing, amazing food. I know a taco stand in Mexico City just got a Michelin star. I mean, you can eat really great with a limited budget here in Mexico. I clearly have a lot of thoughts on this particular topic and should probably just go ahead and make another cost of living in Mexico video. How do you stay safe in Guadalajara? I've heard that it's not one of the safer cities. Living in Mexico, living in a big city like Guadalajara in particular, requires a degree of situational awareness that I think some people, especially coming from small towns or smaller cities, that, I mean, I'm a person from a very small town. I would say that people coming from those environments maybe aren't accustomed to the required level of situational awareness. What do I mean by situational awareness? How do I stay safe in Guadalajara? Well, I am talking about confirming that the license plate in your rideshare app matches the one of the car that pulls up. Watching where you're walking, this is a huge one. You have to be super conscious about traffic. Have a look before you step into a bike lane. Be watching where you are setting your foot. In Mexico, the sidewalks have huge cracks. They're uneven. Sometimes there's just a random hole. A really big one for me in Guadalajara is to share my location, my ETA with people that are expecting me. I always share my Uber ride, share the car tracking or whatever. You can do that right in the app. I usually send that to Taylor with whatever Uber I'm taking any time of day. I'm probably gonna sound like your mom when I say this, but headphones, AirPods, not being out of tune with what's happening around you. Again, situational awareness is the key to staying safe, not just in Guadalajara, not just in Mexico, but anywhere you are in the world. That is a lot of talking, and it is Friday afternoon. I am fading. I need a little pick-me-up. So I am going to one of my favorite little cafes for a nice coffee. The sky is like super cloudy and gray. Wonder if it's gonna rain tonight or this afternoon. Would you recommend using cash or debit cards in restaurants, etc.? Even though Mexico does really have that cash-strong economy, there are loads and loads and loads of places that you can use a credit card. So I definitely recommend traveling to Mexico with a credit card that doesn't have any foreign transaction fees and using that whenever you can, because why not earn some points while you are traveling around Mexico and while you're visiting places that accept credit cards. Got a little cold brew for me and this kombucha for Taylor. Okay, let's dive back into these questions. What percentage is good when it comes to tipping? Is it common to tip everyone? So if you're eating in a restaurant in Mexico, 10 to 15%. I usually go with 15%, but if you were at like an awesome place and the server like really helped you out or something, 20% is, I'm sure, would be appreciated, even though that tip isn't going to go to that specific server. It seems the way it's done here that they pool their tips and it's shared among the whole wait staff. Situations where if you're coming from the US or from Canada that you might not be accustomed to tipping in, where it's definitely appropriate in Mexico, are the person who bags your groceries, the person who loads or unloads your luggage from the bus. Kind of the rule of thumb here is that if someone is helping you with something, then it's appropriate to tip them. Where I will get out my calculator at a restaurant to figure out the percentage based on the bill, the tipping isn't as strict with, the grocery store bagger or with the person at the taco stand. What a lot of people will do in Mexico, what I usually do in Mexico, is sort of just like round up or take from the change that you were given when you paid. Do hotels require a deposit when you book a reservation? If you are reaching out to hotels, this is, first of all, an awesome way to save a little bit of money on your accommodation, because a lot of places will have to increase their prices that they post on booking in order to kind of cover the fee that they have to pay or the commission that that booking takes for having that specific hotel on their platform. Back in February, I went to Malake with my mom and did kind of like do a preliminary search on Booking, but decided what the heck, since we were going to be staying a week, why not reach out to the hotels directly just to kind of compare rates. When I reached out to Bungalows Las Hamacas, which if you're interested, I showed you around that little hotel in my Malake vlog. When I reached out to them, the rate that they gave me was definitely less than the one that was posted on Booking, but they did want a deposit in advance. And they wanted it to be done via bank transfer. Bank transfers are very, very common in Mexico, transferencias. It's gonna be the easiest to do if you have a Mexican bank account. That is, I would say, one of the big advantages of opening a bank account in Mexico. If anyone has experience doing transfers through OXXO, I think that is also an option in Mexico. It's not something I've done personally, but like taking your cash to the OXXO and then having the person's bank account information, or maybe I have done that like a bajillion years ago. But if that's something that anyone has done in Mexico, let us know in the comments how it went. If I get the temporary residency, do I have to physically stay in Mexico to count towards the 4-year residency to obtain permanent residency? No, there is no amount of time that you need to be in Mexico while you have your temporary residency in order to qualify for permanent residency 4 years later. The important thing is that you are physically in Mexico when the time comes to renew your residency, which you have to do after your first year of temporary, but then you can renew for up to 3 years at one time. In some countries, I know that you have to be living in country for a certain amount of days per year in order to maintain your residency, but that is not the case in Mexico, and that's why I encourage people who are thinking that someday down the line they might want to live in Mexico to pursue residency now rather than later, because those financial requirements for proving economic solvency go up every single year. So it's already getting expensive to get your residency in Mexico, but it's not going to cost any less in the future, most likely. I haven't been to Mexico for 2 years, but my Residente Permanente card has no expiration date, and I was told that I can be gone from Mexico for years and still remain a permanent resident. No new changes regarding this. Is this still valid? Once you get your permanent residency, you are a permanent resident for life in Mexico. There's no expiration date on the card, and there's no amount of time that you need to spend in Mexico in order to maintain that permanent residency. However, if you are a permanent resident who wants to become a citizen of Mexico, then there is a certain amount of time that you need to prove that you spend in Mexico each year. You need to show that you live the majority of your life in Mexico. I think it's something like 80% of the year. So you would need to be very cognizant and be tracking the days that you were in Mexico in the year leading up to applying for citizenship. That is not going to be relevant to most people though, since as a permanent resident of Mexico, you pretty much enjoy all of the rights that Mexican citizens have apart from voting. I see people on Reddit complain that you can lose your permanent resident status by the border agent incorrectly putting you as a tourist when entering Mexico. This is worrying to me because if I lose my permanent residency, would I need to meet the requirements all over again? I actually reached out to my good friend Yvonne Pavan of Host Relocation to ask her about this. And Yvonne said that if you somehow are marked as a tourist when you come into Mexico, and the way that this would happen The most likely way that this would happen is if you failed to show your residency card to the immigration officer when you are going through the line to enter Mexico. So when you're going through that line, you are showing the officer your residency card as well as your passport. Yvonne recommends showing your residency card first, just getting in the habit of showing that first and then handing over your passport, because she said if you forget to hand over that residency card and they mark you as a tourist, she's had this happen to a couple of her clients, and it is just a huge headache to get fixed. According to Mexican immigration law, you lose your status as a resident of Mexico if you are marked as a tourist when you enter the country. If this is to happen to you, don't freak out, don't lose your mind over it yet. You should contact a facilitator, somebody like Yvonne with Host Relocation, and what she's done for her clients is she actually goes to the airport with them, where they go to the immigration office inside of the airport and talk to the supervisor there, because it is technically possible to go back into the system and change a person's, I guess, status upon entry, but they are only going to do that if you convince them to do so. So if you don't have a high level of Spanish or a level of Spanish where you are comfortable communicating with an immigration officer about your future in Mexico, then I would highly recommend reaching out to Host Relocation and reaching out to Yvonne. I'm looking for information for health insurance for temporary and permanent residents. Doctor's visits and prescription medicines are much more affordable in Mexico than they are in the US. Those things are possible to pay out of pocket for, but I still highly, highly recommend having health insurance in Mexico, because something catastrophic, if you were in an accident, if you got a serious diagnosis, that could still set you back tens of thousands of dollars, just like it would in the US. We have our health insurance plan with Grupo Nacional Provincial, which I believe is the largest private health insurer in Mexico, and I am going to link our representatives, an awesome guy named Santiago. I am going to link his email address in the description of this video if you wanted to reach out to him to talk about insurance options for you. He has helped temporary, permanent residents, I believe tourists as well, get health insurance in Mexico. Another option is Guardian Health Insurance, which is a very expat-focused, foreigner-focused company. And they are really trying to streamline their process in order to be most beneficial to people who are moving to Mexico from other countries. So everybody on their staff is bilingual. A lot of them have lived abroad at some point. I recommend reaching out to a couple different brokers, checking out different plans, send Santiago an email, get a quote, a no obligation quote from Guardian, and see what the different options are, see what's best for you. Can you get by in Guadalajara for a while with only English? If you think that I am going to tell you that you don't need to speak Spanish to live in Guadalajara or to live in Mexico, then you have come to the wrong YouTube channel. If you want to live your biggest, richest, fullest life in Mexico, then that means really dedicating yourself to learning the language. Of course, learning a language is very, very difficult. I know, it is the hardest thing that I have ever done. So if you do get to Guadalajara and your Spanish isn't quite there yet, you are learning, but it is taking some time, it's a process after all, then I want you to know that you can get by in Guadalajara with limited Spanish. There are a lot of people that do speak English, especially younger people. And if you are meaning getting by in terms of finding service providers, specifically doctors, dentists, people to cut your hair that speak English, that is definitely possible here in Guadalajara. If you made it this far in the video, first of all, I want to know who you are. Say hi in the comments below, and please feel free to ask any other questions that you have about living in Mexico, moving to Mexico, or share ideas that you have for other videos, future vlogs that you would like to see on the channel. I'm really trying to push out the content right now and want to make the things that you want to see. I'm Alex from backpackingbrunette.com. Thanks for watching.